All right, today we're going to be going over the gearing systems that we've seen in Dragonflight, talking about some of the best and talking about some of the worst. I think I got them all, but I guess I'm not explicitly certain that I got them all. This originally was just going to be like the systems that we saw for the expansion, but then I realized that all the systems that I was listing were just gearing systems. And so yeah, we're just going to talk about, I guess, gearing systems. So first and foremost, we had the Onyx Amulet. This was in patch 10.0.7, and it dropped out of the Zeskara vaults. I think that the Onyx Amulet was a weird one because the way that this ring worked was it was very good for some specializations and really bad for almost all DPS. And so it became very boring because of this. There was also this weird situation where a lot of healers ended up wearing it into Aberrus. There was also a couple of kind of unique interactions where it would do like infinite healing if you wore the correct gems, but then they very quickly nerfed those interactions, and so then this thing became very boring. I did not like the Onyx Amulet. I think that the Zeskara vaults were actually kind of cool, but I thought the Amulet was not sick. I'm probably considering between C and D. I think the fact that healers ended up having to wear this in Aberrus is probably going to push this a bit towards D tier for me. Again, I just don't think this was like a very fun item. Blizzard stated that they were going to nerf it to the point where you weren't going to be wearing it in the next tier, but on my Druid, I didn't even wear it whenever it was current, and then I didn't wear it past to that. But then all the healers wore it whenever it was current, and then wore it into Aberrus, and that like creates like this weird dynamic where it was, you know, not what they were intending at all, and then it was like a 50 item level gain for rogues, and so then that was like pretty bad. I think that the amulet, maybe, I think it could have been a lot more interesting. I didn't like the procs. I thought the procs weren't very fun. It was like a combination of it wasn't impactful enough, yet it was really cringe in some spots, and it was also on a ring, so we're gonna leave it in D tier, I guess. I don't think that's that great. Booleans. I think Booleans this expansion, they're a lot better than the Dinars were, especially with how you acquire Booleans, how often you're getting them. Deterministic loot in WoW is very fun. I think that Booleans are just a system that has been pretty well received for people who are playing Season 4. Not a lot of people are playing Season 4. I think that that's fairly clear, is that not a lot of people are playing Season 4, but in general, though, Booleans, I think, are still a pretty large success. Would they be okay in a normal season? I'm not really sure. Would they be really... I think they would be kind of interesting, though, if they came out, you know, halfway through a patch or something like that, and then allowed you to have some way of deterministically acquiring loot, even if it's not at the same rate that it is currently. If you were allowed to have some level of deterministic loot, I think that Booleans as a whole are probably just S tier system. I think that you could maybe make an argument that you're getting geared too quickly, but in general, that's not the point of this video. That's the point of this video is literally just talking about how I feel about the system as a whole. I think the system is pretty sick. Crests. Okay, so crests, I think is... I tweeted about this. I think it's probably the best system that they came up with this expansion. I think that crests do have their drawbacks. First and foremost, I think that the Flightstone system and crest acquisition on alts is obviously very problematic. The rate at which you acquire crests on characters that you're not actively, you know, grinding on is probably a bit too slow, especially after you get past, you know, week 6, week 7, week 8. If you want to start an alt, it sucks. But I will say the big thing is, like, for a long time, players who wanted to only do M+ had to kind of justify the fact that they were going to be probably about 10 item levels down on a player who was actively raiding, whereas this crest system and introducing the myth track and having a lot of gear path upgrades has actually done a lot of good for those players who just in general want to interact with only M+ and don't necessarily want to gear through raid. This also allows some gear from the vault to be upgradable too, I think, which is actually kind of an interesting system. There are some downsides. I think that in Aberrus, obviously the gearing was too fast, where you were, you know, fully geared far too quickly. I do also think this has created maybe a little bit of a weird dynamic where end of dungeon rewards are a bit too strong. particularly for progression rating, you know, end of dungeon rewards being able to be upgraded all the way up to the max hero track, and the pace at which you're able to acquire these end of dungeon rewards is maybe a bit too high, especially with how fast you can upgrade them with crests. In general, though, I think the crest system is probably going to go into A. I think the biggest downside, and something that I would like them to be looking into in the future, is more in line of, first and foremost, how many crests do they want us to have, or are they okay with what happened in Dragonflight Season 3 and / Season 4? Like, are they okay with that level of crest acquisition? But I think the bigger thing is, too, like, being able to not have to grind 100 dungeons if you want to get an alt ready. And then also flight stones, I think, is a completely useless currency that could probably go away. But I think that crests are a slam dunk, all things considered. Big fan. There's some problems with it. But I don't think in general it's like that bad of a system. I think it's sick. Yushen. Embells. Okay, so I'll talk about embellishments. I separated out from profession gear, and I'll probably talk about these back to back. So I'll actually talk about profession gear first. So profession gear, what Blizzard's stated goal is to make professions more usable, I guess, for players who aren't interacting with high-end PvE content. And so allowing players to, you know, kind of grind up their professions and feel like they're actually having an impact in the game. I think that profession gear started off really strong. I remember in Season 1, you know, your profession gear was allowing you to get 426 item level gear when the max was like 429 or something like that. And so it was like 3 item levels below like max raid gear, and everybody wore a ton of profession gear. It was kind of insane, to the point where Blizzard was like, let's nerf this. which was valid. And then it got a little bit worse. But I think in general, profession gear has been largely accepted as like just the profession gear itself is a pretty large success. Now, I think that the downside of profession gear is it's a bit convoluted, the process to actually get it. You have to go through a lot of steps, whether it be buying a bunch of materials on the auction house that created this weird profession crafting cartel thing. There's a lot of, you know, garbage surrounding, you know, how to use the consortium and get your gear crafted. It feels very unintuitive in that regard. And I think that from that aspect of it, I don't think profession gear is that sick. But I think that, you know, being able to, again, continue to have like alternate gear tracks, say you're not just doing this like super hardcore raiding thing, right? And say you're trying to play the game casually, your gear is going to be more relevant than it was ever before. And even if you are playing down a few item levels on a piece, say you are playing down, you know, 3 to 6 item levels on a piece, there's going to be some damage loss because you're just not going to be optimal. But in general, I think that the profession gear did its job pretty well. Now, embellishments, on the other hand, I don't think did their job very well. I think that embellishments are a combination of too strong yet not strong enough, and they're really bland, kind of similar to the Onyx Amulet. You're only allowed to have 2 embellishments, so at minimum, Blizzard's trying to get you to where you're always at least going to be wearing 2 pieces of profession gear, which I think was their intended goal with embellishments. But then, you know, they're just like not very cool. The procs on them aren't very sick, and then it just ends up feeling really awkward. And then you end up wearing like blue silken lining on all of your DPS. I think that embellishments are actually staying in the War Within, but I would like to actually see like a redesign of, you know, maybe the relative power or the procs of these. I think they have some room to move up in the relative power of the embellishments, especially since everybody's expected to kind of wear 2 of these. We also had an entire season where everybody was wearing Lariat. Like, that is the level the embellishments are going into. I'm leaning C. I don't think embellishments deserve D tier with the Onyx Amulet. I think that there is definitely some room for them to be okay. I think that I just don't think that in general they were that great. Yeah, let's go with C tier for embellishments. Legendaries. All right, so everything about legendaries from this expansion was cool, except for the acquisition process, which was the worst possible thing imaginable. Fearlath and the Evoker Legendary Nuzuro were, I don't think, that bad. I think the Fearlath in general was actually kind of cool. I think that Nuzuro was also kind of cool. The acquisition, this is one that the acquisition process of a legendary felt fucking terrible. Having to build up 15 weeks of heroic kills worth of bad luck protection, or 12 weeks worth of kills of bad luck protection feels awful for anybody involved. And even if you are killing Mythic, you're not actually even getting these legendaries with any meaningful BLP. The acquisition of this is G tier terrible. The legendaries themselves are like pretty decent, but I think that the acquisition is something that's holding them back. Legendaries in the future, how do I feel about them in the future? I think they're okay. I actually don't love the one legendary per patch thing. I think that maybe makes them feel like less cool. But in general, I think that legendaries weren't terrible just by themselves. But again, the acquisition process is definitely holding this one back. I think I'm inclined to either put this in C or D tier. I think that I'm leaning towards D, mostly because too there was also some weird tuning with Fearlath for a long time where they kept having to buff it after it came out because people weren't necessarily using it. You know, I think that in general, I'm just going to leave this in D tier. Fix the acquisition process, and then maybe we can reassess. I think maybe if I was ranking them on just the legendaries themselves, it would probably be C or B. Maybe leaning towards B, but with the acquisition process being as bad as it was, I'm going to lean towards D. Okay. Valor, which a lot of people forget that Valor was in the game, including myself. Somebody told me about this whenever I was talking to them about this video, that Valor was actually in the game in Season 1, and I completely forgot about this. Valor was basically the precursor to the Crest and upgrade system, where Valor was, you know, allowing you to basically just have like 459 level gear with rating requirement that was attached to it to be able to upgrade gear with Valor. Valor was, you know, the cap of the Valor was 13 item levels below where the cap of Crests are, which I think is, you know, maybe a little bit worse. I think that in general, Valor is just like a worse system than Crests. Just because like Valor was a system that was designed for heroic raiders to again have like heroic level equivalent gear, where this Crest system is a system that is designed for basically all players to interact with in some meaningful capacity. And so I think in general, Valor was okay for what it did, but I think that the Crest system is a lot more expansive and just in general, I think a little bit better of a system. More than anything, too, it's like this isn't designed for like players who were trying to play the game like in any meaningful capacity at end game level. Like having 415 item level gear whenever some people are, you know, 426 item level is just like going to feel really bad. Basically, all of this gear is going to get replaced with profession gear or something as well. I think in general, we put Valor in B. I don't think it's bad. I just think that the Crest system was a bit of a better version of this, even though Crests had their own flaws. The Great Vault. The Great Vault didn't change from Shadowlands to BFA. From Shadowlands to Dragonflight. I think the Great Vault is okay. I'm inclined to probably put this in B tier. So the thing that the Vault does pretty good is it allows you to, you know, get a bit more loot on a week-by-week basis. You know, there's like some level of you get to pick what loot you're getting out of the Vault. But I think a lot of criticisms with the Vault in general is that it's largely random, right? There's no deterministic aspect to the Vault, so it feels a little bit bad. Now the Vault does allow you to get you're able to get sparks out of the Vault, which allows you to craft profession gear. You're also able to get sockets out of the Vault, which allows you to craft profession gear. I see people talking about should we be able to get tertiaries out of the Vault? I think the answer is probably no. I think that tertiaries are just too strong, and if they were weaker, then you wouldn't want them out of the Vault anyways. But I think in general, the Vault does like a lot of things that are okay. I think that if the Vault got to turned into something that was maybe a little bit more deterministic, there's, I think, a lot of upward mobility for the Vault. But I think as it currently stands, the Vault isn't like particularly bad. I just think that it could be a little bit better. I do think that what they're doing in Season 4 right now, where you're actually able to get 2 sockets per Vault whenever you have to take that, it feels a lot better. But yeah, I think in general, it's like, there's no deterministic loot on it. You know, it's largely pretty good for especially Mythic Plus only players, but even for raiders and stuff like that, having a lot of access to Myth track level gear, it's pretty solid. I don't think it can go below B. I don't think it's like the greatest thing they've ever created, but I don't think it's like awful. Very rare items got off to a terrible start. Probably because they just dropped too infrequently, and I put the Whispering Incarnate icon because this was the quintessential very rare item, especially for the first patch, where then you also had, it was like this, they were on like this higher gear track, but then they didn't drop enough And so the first season, that very rare items, you saw a bunch of people were straight up bitching about it. And then in season 2 and season 3, they upped the drop chance, and people started complaining a lot less. I think in general, very rare items are like okay. At the end of the system, I didn't feel like they felt any different than any other item. Honestly, no trinket. You know, was it a very rare trinket or was it a normal trinket? I didn't feel like there was any difference. And so I felt like they kind of lost that very rare moniker, aside from, you know, just being tagged as very rare in the dungeon journal. And so for that aspect, I think that they were a little bit of a failure. I think that there was just a problem. There's a problem with like the loot. Oh my gosh, terrible voice crack. The loot itself, I think in season 1, there was just a problem with how infrequent they dropped. And then once players noticed how infrequent they dropped relative to how strong they were power-wise, this created this weird dynamic where everybody wanted very rare items, but not everybody was going to get them in any capacity. Dude, I went the entire patch without being able to get a Broodkeeper ring. None of my alts had Incarnate Icon, like, and then the best thing to do for your vault for alts the entire patch for the first season, whenever these items were BIS, was doing 2 out of 8, just because then you didn't pollute your vault. Like that being a weird dynamic was also terrible. I think that very rare items probably belong in C tier. I don't think that they're as bad or as egregious as the Onyx Amulet of the Legendaries, but I think that they were they could have been better handled, I think. I wouldn't mind seeing... So whenever I was talking about embellishments, I wouldn't mind seeing embellishments rethought. I wouldn't hate seeing very rare items go away. They just felt like there was no difference at the end of the expansion between very rare items and just normal items. And if it's going to be like they were in season 1, where they were, you know, so strong that everybody wanted them, yet they didn't have like the appropriate drop chance because they have that very rare moniker, I'm just not a huge fan of that in general. But yeah, that's how I ranked all the gearing systems for this expansion. Hopefully I didn't miss any. And if I did, it is what it is. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.